If I were asked to name the top public lands policy scholars in the country, the first name that I would think of is John Freemuth. So I am very pleased to be able to introduce him today. John's a professor of public policy at Boise State University, works, as I mentioned, in public lands, and he's had a distinguished career, has been chairman of the Science Advisory Board for the Bureau of Land Management back when Secretary Babbitt was Secretary of Interior. He's been a senior fellow at the Cecil Andrus Center for Public Policy for on and off since 1998. And I'm going to just let him do the talking.
Thank you, Mark. So, as Mark said, I'm at Boise State. First time on your lovely campus here, and I'll really try not to fumble my lecture and turn it over 8 times, okay? I was not a happy guy going, I've never seen a game like that in my life, but everybody deserves one, I guess, and you deserve that win for sure. Then what happened last week? Yeah, we won't talk about that. So a year ago, I talked at the Sagebrush Step conference on fire and Sage-Grouse, and I gave a talk on why it matters. And what I thought I'd do today is simply, okay, in a year, what's happened since then, okay? This will be a pretty big picture, 50,000 foot set of observations, and no PowerPoint, okay? We all need a little relief from that, plus I'm crappy at it anyway, all right? So, one of the reasons we were able to do all this so quickly is because of a threat. And we all know what the threat was. It was the threat of an endangered species listing. And that's not going away. In 5 years, Fish and Wildlife's going to revisit it again. So I work a little with Interior on some of this, though I don't want to overstate my role by any way. But Fish and Wildlife will have to look at it again in 5 years. And the commitment's got to stay. There will be a different administration in 5 years. You have to credit the current one for putting that conference together in 6 months, Secretary Jewell's order, and things actually trying to get out on the ground for the government to do something that fast. And I'm not some snarky debater here bashing the government and then saying I want to be president of it, perhaps like we saw last night a little bit. I'm not partisan, however, is that that's pretty good. I think people like Janice Snyder and the secretary really made a commitment to get stuff done, and that's pretty impressive, all right? But without the threat, it doesn't happen. This is the irony of American politics. There used to be this great cliche that God takes care of little children drunks in the United States of America, which means that we tend to see things happen in our politics, in our country, in a crisis. Otherwise, we're at each other's throats. We don't care. We can't get anything done. But in a crisis, things move. And I think this, and certainly ecologists and biologists can tell us there's a lot of other virtues to the Endangered Species Act, but this is one of its most important functions. It's an action forcer, all right? Not necessarily was designed that way. I don't think we really, in an ideal sense want to use it that way, but it worked, okay? The threat of a listing of the greater sage-grouse, and by the way, I did this a year ago, I have to do it again. My alma mater is Pomona College, and our mascot is the sage hen. So it's personal to me. What do we do if it's extinct? We got to change our mascot? I don't know. But the crisis did it, okay? I've worked a lot with Cecil Andrus, and he's kind of a master at sort of forcing things to happen that way. And the Antiquities Act worked in Alaska that way. Without going into that in detail, I don't have the time, but it was his sitting down with President Carter saying, well, there's a certain character senator named Mike Gravel in Alaska that's filibustering everything. We're not going to get stuff done. And he explained the Antiquities Act to President Carter. Carter looked at him. Carter was from Georgia, right? We tend to have these presidents who kind of like, well, tell me a little about the public lands, because they're not from the West. Carter looked at then Secretary Andrus and said, I can do that? And Secretary Andrus said, well, yes, sir, you can. That being setting aside about 100 million acres until they actually could pass the law. Well, let's do it. They did it. It forced action. You got what you got in Alaska. All right. The point is, it forced something. The threat of, well, they'll just stay national monuments then, finally got the Senate and the House to get things done. And that's important. Okay. Another thing this has done, however, and I noticed there were some presentations on this, is it's increased collaboration. Collaboration is messy, okay? It takes forever. People have to commit to it. But there is no other alternative, all right? And this has caused a lot of that to happen, all right? It's not the only panacea. You need other things too. People wouldn't have collaborated probably without the threat of an endangered species listing. People just don't sing Kumbaya for the fun of it. A lot of times collaboration will begin because there is no other alternative. But it does create those sorts of personal relationships that used to govern American politics, right? Before it's turned into whatever it's turned into now, and that's a whole nother lecture and discussion. I don't have the answer anymore, anybody else does, but I have some reasons. But people used to collaborate in our politics. That's how we got important laws passed, but now they don't collaborate. They demonize, they're partisanized, whatever you want to say. But collaboration is actually it's not a new thing. It's a new thing perhaps in public lands in terms of how we talk about things, but that has been one of the virtue of all of our discussions about sage-grouse and so forth. On the other hand, we all know the danger, at least I assume everybody's going to kind of be on the side of this, and that's, here we go again with Sagebrush Rebellion 47. We want the federal lands. We demand the federal lands. Well, actually, you don't demand the federal lands, state of Utah. Well, you guys seem to be the leaders of this time. We in Idaho have led in the past. Arizona, I don't know if you guys know this, but Arizona actually voted on demanding the federal lands in the legislature. It lost 2-1 in Arizona, not exactly New York in terms of its politics, or California, but it lost 2-1. We're still into it again. The only way it could ever happen is Congress has to transfer those lands. That's the only way it happens. There is no legal argument. Call Bob Kiter up at the U of U. He's a law professor there, and he'll give you all those legal answers about why it's not going to happen. But it's around, it's divisive, and it does influence everything. And, you know, because I shoot my mouth off a lot, I was talking about Jeb Bush, actually to his credit, proposed some federal land policy, including moving interior to the west, which probably doesn't work for the secretary, and probably Jeb didn't quite understand that 93% of interior employees are in the west. But it wouldn't hurt to have more of a leadership presence in the West, though if you're Sally Jewell, you're in the West all the time. But a lot of his other stuff was fairly recycled and problematic when he suggests that locals should have more say than anyone else. That's just probably a non-starter. Locals should have voice, there's no question, and sometimes they don't have voice. But I didn't think there was a lot there, and I was hoping, though, in the debate last night that somebody would actually, okay, well, Mr. Bush has a proposal. What about the rest of you guys? I would have liked to have seen that, right? They were in Boulder, the People's Republic of Boulder, I should add. But I would have liked to have seen the rest of those folks answer that question about what do you think about the public lands? Probably some of them would have answered something like, we have public lands. And there probably would have been some good sound bites for us out in the West. But I never heard much about it. I would simply add, I have a little sentence or two to read here. Both in and out of Congress, an attempt is being made to turn the national forests, which belong to the whole people, over to the western states. This was started because most of the openings through which the public lands and their resources have been stolen have been closed. Gifford Pinchot, 1913. It's been around. It's like the people who still refer to the Civil War as the War of Northern Aggression. It's like, what do people like pass this on to the next generation? I mean, 1913, you could take what Pinchot said, and it could be 2015. It's an endless issue in the West. I think unfortunately, I think that all the collaboration and the non-listing has probably, to use a fire analogy, taken some of the fuel out of there. But some of these people are not giving up, all right? And it will be divisive as the rest of you try to actually help and solve and do research on the ground, all right? That's my worry anyway. I think some other things that are emerging, and I know people are going to disagree, but I think fire in terms of range fire, sagebrush steppe fire is now as important as forest fire in our consciousness. Sorry, Forest Service, but I think that's true, and it ought to be true. Fire's fire, and we need to worry about it in all its types. It's also curious to me that much like we've started talking about timber harvesting is as much a tool to restore our forests, we're starting to hear, and I realize this is going to be very controversial, but we're starting to hear that grazing is a tool, not an industrial right. Not that some people don't think it's that, and that's fine, but I'm just saying we're starting to hear grazing framed the same way that timber harvesting has been framed over the last 20 years. More as a tool that can help in some cases, not necessarily just simply a right. How about turf? You know, I was worried a year ago, there's federal land turf, right? Agencies that do the same things. I'm sure there's people in this room that went to Utah State that now work at the state. They work for BLM, they work for the Forest Service. You were all trained at great land grants like this, all right? But then you get in the agencies and you get turf, all right? And turf is normal, it's natural. But I was worried that it would slow some of this stuff down. I don't think it did. Too much anyway. I remember a well-intentioned guy getting all upset a year ago because they wanted to get the ecologists and biologists out on the ground to help the incident commanders understand where to target where they were going because there was key habitat out there for sage-grouse. And somebody well-intentioned got up and said, but we don't want ecologists out there, they're not red-carded. Well, they're not going to be fighting the fire, all right? And that was overcome, I think, but you know, it's here we go. But I think they were able to work that out, and that's a good thing. A funny story, I got to tell it because it took a long time to get past this. But when Los Alamos went up, I happened to be at NIFC giving a talk. And one well-intentioned person got up and said, we really need to tell people that fire's a good thing. And I said, you see that screen? This is not the day to tell people that fire's a good thing. Wait. But the funnier one was, you know, guys, if you want to get the message out, and it's a good message, and I'll defer to all the scientists who know much more than I do on that one, I said, use the bear. Use Smokey. Can you imagine him walking out on some good time to run a commercial, like in the middle of the Super Bowl or something, and going, you know, we've learned a lot about fire since I was a cub. Sometimes fire is a good thing. I watched these guys start a half-an-hour argument about whether Smokey should be used for that. My point was simply, you've got this symbol that most people would kill to have, articulating something that some speech can never do, right, about fire. And no, we can't. That might get people to start fires. I was like, wow, really? You know, it's just, I think that got back by, but that was turf again, you know, well, it's our bear and you can't change that and so forth and so on. It's not your bear, our bear. Science. I used to worry about, I still do, because I love natural resource scientists. I've learned more from them, I'm sure, than I've ever told them about the crazy, wacky world of politics. But I used to worry about advocacy science. And I still say to people, hold on to your wallet if anybody ever says the science is in. What the hell does that mean? The science, right, is never in. You've got a pretty good probability that something's going to happen, like the sun will come up tomorrow, but it might not. Nobody will stay with 100% certainty if they're a good scientist that anything is in. All right, and granted, that's when advocates hijack science on both sides to try to win, which are essentially political arguments by saying, well, we can't have an argument because the science is in. Since when have we said that science is a trump? Now, maybe it should be, given some of the other trumps that apparently are used to make decisions. And I'm not necessarily talking, well, we can talk about him too, but we won't. But money or power or politics. But I used to worry about that, and it's still there, probably more so in climate change. And again, I think it's more advocates that do it. But I did help write the science strategy for BLM, where we just sort of said science is useful, very useful for evaluating alternatives and estimating outcomes, but it's not the sole factor in natural resource decision making. Okay, fine. I've said that. What worries me now, though, is something else, and there has been, I don't know if so much of it's going on now, but there was an attack on science during all the Sage-Grouse business. And it went like this. Certain members of Congress, for example, the BLM, the science assessment teams, technical team that did some of the work a couple of years ago, had it peer reviewed. And the peer reviews, and those of you who have gone through that, either hopefully as a gentle, thoughtful peer reviewer or have had your stuff reviewed, know that stuff can be really kind of petty sometimes and a little vicious, right? I don't know why people are that way. I think sometimes we're all academics and other scientists, obviously at USGS, we're all kind of insecure about ourselves, I guess. I don't know why we have to treat an article so maliciously, and I can come back to that in a minute. But so the peer review, the BLM thing was pretty good, but obviously the peer review said, well, this stuff, needs work. This part of this needs work. This is good, but needs works. So the congressman and his staff accepted some of that out, along with the oil and gas industry, to say, well, we can't trust this because it needs work. That was like a sentence in a 20-page peer review. Imagine, this is a true story, imagine if this happened to my friend Greg Cawley at the University of Wyoming, who wrote the definitive book on the Sagebrush Rebellion. And Mark would know Sally Fairfax, sort of a legendary public lands professor at Berkeley. Sally's emeritus now. She's wonderful. She's one of the first women who broke into natural resources and public lands. And Sally reviewed Greg's book, and of course in the margin of the manuscript wrote, oh, horseshit, Greg. Pardon my language, but that's Sally, okay? Now imagine if Greg's book became very influential in some sort of debate, and, somebody got up there and said, you can't trust this book, it's horseshit. That was one word in a how long review. That's going on now, is my point, more and more. People pulling out little aspects of a peer review, and, the general public, right? You explain to them that side of science, and they're likely to shut us all down and tell the NSF to close, all right? Because they would not understand all this peer review stuff in the sense of why the language is the way it is and so forth and so on. But there's more of that going on, okay? Even worse, during some of this, imagine this. Okay, now, government scientists do have to make a lot of their data available, all right? And this gets very complicated. I don't have time to get into it, but imagine this. A journal gets an article and something to do with sage-grouse habitat, fire, whatever it might be, and they send it off to reviewers, and those reviewers do their job and do peer review and send it back, and say change this, this is good, do this, and we recommend it be published. And it goes through that process, and it is. Okay, so the stuff turns out to be good science. And it might suggest that certain activities may have to give way if we value sagebrush, sage-grouse protection as a priority, if we value that, okay? Whether we should is sort of up to all of us. And so Congress and the oil and gas industry get upset, and they demand from the journal the peer review and the names of the peer reviewers. Now, as I understand this, that journal has been able to resist that. But folks, what I'm saying here is, and you're in a conference for 2 days, that you're learning a lot of good science from a lot of good people. But if we blow up the peer review process like that, what do we got left? However flawed it can be, however mean-spirited, what do we got left? And there was a pretty concerted attack on it that and obviously some of this stuff was leaked to me by people I know who I will never name because they're just great people and they're doing good work, sort of like that thing that Julie McDonald did, if some of you remember when the science assessment came out, and that was a mess, but that's an old story. But the point is, this is not good. All right, and it's going on under the water a little bit, and I think it's backed off a little now because we don't have a listing, but it was appalling in terms of, you have a concerted attack on peer review. We don't have, what do we do? And how many people are going to be willing to peer review something if they think their name's going to be in front of some yokel that's, so-and-so said this about this? I mean, peer review is supposed to be double-blind and anonymous. So I think it's going to be an interesting 5 years in terms of, obviously fire is a key component to a lot of things that go beyond sage-grouse, but in a big public policy sense, I hope we can focus on this for 5 years, and I'm the first person to say, and though you know it more than me, the first thing we cut is monitoring, and that should be the last thing we cut if we want to know what's going on. I'll stop there, take any kind of questions, or Mark's waving that I've got less than 5 minutes, so I want to stop and see if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, besides clapping. Do I need to clap? Any of you? Somebody's got to have something. Never. I'm just wacky, aren't I? It's like, well, that wasn't a PowerPoint. I don't know what to say.
So I work for the BLM as a range specialist, and what I've seen a lot of these talks over the last decade.
Like mine or other talks? Okay.
Research going on and on. Where do we come at a point to where we sit down with the universities and BLM Forest Service and say, okay, can you guys do this research for us? Can you do this research? Have you seen anything like that going on?
I've seen some of that, but my quick version of that is it's complicated. Number one, you have to understand that public higher education is really in a mess right now. Our legislatures I'm not sitting here asking for money, don't misunderstand me, but we're not being funded by the state, so we have to go out and chase money, and now we chase money through big donations. Micron just gave Boise State $25 million for material science stuff. Yeah, they're buying that, but that's the nature of that. Or you get big grants. I've got a $3 million grant. I got really lucky with friends in USGS. I run the gap analysis program in protected area database. I have 6 wizards who do that. I'm the policy guy, so I don't know what they're doing. I trust them. They're not drinking, or it's that kind of thing. But to me, if you've got the money, universities need money, and we need a closer relationship. I mean, I'm biased. I am so public applied. I've written my books, but I hate the ivory tower in sense of, I don't have to deal with the BLM. I know more than they do. I'm the one with the doctorate. I mean, that's dumb. And so this kind of relationship between the university and Utah State is good at this, like Oregon State, like some of the great land grants, of relating your research to the needs of the agencies. And And the managers need to be in the middle of this too. You know, good scientists don't understand or didn't how their science gets used by management. And that's because people are wearing different hats. And it'd be great to see a meeting where the scientists and the managers duked it out about how managers use science, how scientists don't understand how it gets used, how managers understand the science. But it's almost a cultural problem where you guys have real needs, but the university's culture is not aligned to yours. I think it is in Mark's case, for example, or others I know. But if you've got some money, you got to focus, okay, we want you to do this work, not go to Europe and dick around, you know, for 3 weeks on our money, you know, which happens. That's a general answer, is target your money to academics and their grad students who are willing to do the work you need. That's what a public university should be doing, in my opinion. Yes?
Just to add to that last question, so I work for the Great Basin Science Exchange, funded by the Joint Fire Science Program, and granted, they don't have the type of money that like a tech company would have, but they really are trying to get science, fund projects that are applicable. So you guys should contact whatever your region you're in. If you're in the Great Basin, contact me, and we can get your needs up to the Joint Fire Science Program who funds that work. And then also just to add, like John Freemuth was saying, like professors aren't. It's about not only is it about money, but it's also about professors are tenured by publications.
Yeah.
So that we need to change in our society, you know, how people move up.
It's a good point. But what's important about meetings like this too is now you guys can talk. Yeah, we yak up here, but it's the side conversations that happen that get stuff done at these kinds of things. Mark, should I stop?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, Darren had a question?